Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the sandals of a man whose life is equal parts robe, fire, and psychological warfare. Imagine this. The year is 1242. You wake up before dawn not because you want to, but because someone in the next cell is weeping again. The stone beneath you is cold, your cloak still damp from last night's fog, and you haven't even gotten to the executions yet. Welcome to the life of a medieval inquisitor. You're not here to heal or comfort. You're here to question, to uncover, to purge. And whether or not you believe in your mission, you're going to carry it out anyway. Because if you don't, someone might question you. And we both know what happens to the ones who get questioned. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the grey corridor of the monastery, candle in hand. The walls are narrow, lined with frescoes of saints who once healed lepers and raised the dead, quite a contrast to your own job description. The silence here isn't holy. It's heavy, like it's pressing down on your ribs just enough to remind you, you're not here for comfort. You're here for control. Your morning begins not with prayer, but with parchment, a report from Béziers, another village infected with heretical whispers. The Cathars, again. You sigh. They always believe in reincarnation and dualism, and they're always hiding somewhere just inconvenient enough to ruin your week. As an inquisitor sanctioned by the Papa, specifically Pope Gregory IX, who launched the Papal Inquisition in 1231, you carry more weight than most secular lords. You're a Dominican friar, yes, bound by vows, but you're also a detective, prosecutor, psychologist, and an bad dacer, very theatrical execution planner. You pull on your cloak, its black folds hiding ink stains, blood stains, and your fading sense of certainty. Your badge, a simple iron cross, rests over your chest like a warning more than a comfort. There's no sword on your belt, just scripture, and the weight of absolute authority. People call you father, but they tremble when they say it, and not in a warm, fuzzy way. Walking through the village square, you see eyes divert. Mothers whisper prayers as you pass, pulling children behind skirts like your shadow bites. You recognize one of them. She baked you bread last time. This time, she offers nothing but a silent bow. She's scared, and maybe she should be, because being an inquisitor means carrying an arsenal of unspoken threats. You don't even have to raise your voice. Just asking someone if they've ever heard heretical ideas can be enough to make them sweat through their tunic. And if they twitch, look away too fast, their name goes on a list. Historians still argue whether the Inquisition's primary aim was spiritual correction or sheer control. Some say it was a reaction to real social instability. Others say it was an excuse to centralize papal power and squash dissent disguised as heresy. You don't have the luxury of pondering that debate. You're in it, living it. And no, you're not entirely free either. Every decision you make gets sent up the chain, sometimes to Avignon, sometimes to Rome. If you go too easy on someone, you're accused of softness. Too harsh? Zealotry. Even your handwriting can be criticized. There are rules to this madness, and breaking them means you switch sides fast. You remember your first confession. Not yours, theirs. A boy, barely 15, trembling like a leaf under your questioning. You thought you'd feel triumphant. Instead, you felt sticky, like something ancient and wrong had brushed past your skin. But then your superior praised you, said you had the gift, and you buried that feeling deep, like a snake under snow. One mainstream historical fact that always surprises modern ears. Inquisitors were supposed to offer mercy first. Yeah, there was this whole spiel about returning to the faith voluntarily. They even got reduced penance if they confessed right away. But here's the catch. Refusing to talk wasn't treated as piety. It was treated as obstinate sand. That's when the questioning got creative. And speaking of creative, you once met an inquisitor who believed sneezing during an interrogation was a sign of demonic influence. He'd been kicked in the head by a mule as a child, but Rome still gave him robes and authority. So, there's that. As you kneel in the church for the afternoon liturgy, surrounded by candle smoke and hollow chanting, your mind drifts, not toward heaven, but toward logistics. Where to store the new prisoners? Which scribe will forge the next set of witness statements? Whether you'll need more rope? These thoughts would horrify your grandmother, but she's long dead, and you're the one left praying for souls while calculating rope tension in your head. Later that evening, a local noble invites you to supper. Of course, he wants a favor. They always do. Maybe it's to accuse a rival of heresy. Maybe it's to quietly excuse his own son from scrutiny. You'll smile, sip the wine, and play dumb. But you'll remember, in your line of work, every conversation is a file waiting to be opened later. And as night falls, you return to your quarters, light a small oil lamp, and open your ledger. Names, places, whispered rumors. It's more than a book. It's a map of fear. You run your fingers down a list of peasants, artisans, widows. Some will talk, some will deny, all will suffer. Still, there's one name you pause on. A woman in her 40s, known healer, rarely attends mass. Locals claim her touch eased fevers. A miracle or a manipulation? You're not sure yet. But tomorrow she'll find herself seated across from you, under the weight of your gaze, and the long silence that always comes before the first question. So, you close your book, exhale, and let the candle sputter out. Another day, another soul. Your journey to becoming an inquisitor wasn't exactly a career fair decision. No one strolls into the abbey thinking, I'd like to spend my life interrogating bakers and burning books. But here you are. It started simply enough study, obedience, piety. You were young, quiet, maybe even a little too serious. The kind of novice who copied scripture without doodling in the margins. And someone noticed. At first it was flattering. You're sharp, they said, disciplined, good memory. You were handed more texts, deeper theology, then secret writings on heresies. One day, a travelling friar from the order of preachers the Dominicans visited. He wasn't like the other monks. His cloak smelled of horses and ash. He spoke in whispers, but looked at people like he already knew what they'd confess. You admired him, of course. Everyone did. But he didn't leave alone. You were sent to Toulouse. There, the real training began. Not in prayers, but in patterns. How to read body language. How to detect linguistic inconsistencies. How to spot fear that was genuine and fear that was rehearsed. How to speak softly enough that the accused leaned forward and accidentally gave away too much. In other words, you were trained not to find heresy, but to build it from suspicion. You're taught the basics, of course. Manichaean dualism, Waldensian simplicity, the errors of the free spirit. But what matters more is knowing how people deviate. A woman who gives alms too often, a man who refuses wine at feasts, a child who won't recite the creed. Sometimes it's not what they do, it's what they won't do that gets them noticed. One mainstream historical truth: becoming an inquisitor wasn't a punishment, it was an elite promotion. The Dominicans were chosen because they were educated, fervent, and already skilled preachers. You weren't some random monk with a candle and a bad attitude. You were hand-picked. That's why you feel both pride and pressure. At the center of your training is the Manualtha Directorium Inquisitorum, written by fellow inquisitor Nicolas Imeric in the 14th century. Though you're living decades earlier, the thinking was already forming. It outlines how to spot heresy, how to interrogate, and how to handle the dreaded false penitent. That's someone who confesses just enough to buy time or avoid the fire. And yes, this is a job that requires you to read people's souls, or at least pretend you can. Your first mission was small, a village with rumors of secret night gatherings. You expected bonfires, chants, maybe a goat. What you found was a dozen farmers sitting around a dying hearth, arguing about whether Christ had a human body or just appeared to. You questioned them for hours. They were terrified. One of them cried when you used the word blasphemy. You remember thinking, they're not evil, just confused. You recommended penance and moved on. Your mentor disagreed. He said you were soft. That confusion was dangerous. That the devil's favorite costume was well-meaning ignorance. He sent you back. This time, you returned with guards. It didn't feel like justice. It felt like theatre. Historians still argue whether inquisitors like you truly believed they were saving Solsa, just playing politics for Rome. Some documents suggest a sincere desire to root out error. Others paint a bleaker picture. Land grabs, reputation wars, even jealousy among bishops. You, though? You're still not sure. On good days, you think you're protecting the flock. On bad days, it feels like you're setting it on fire and calling it purification. Of course, there's a fringe theory whispered among monks that inquisitors were chosen not for their piety, but for their lack of doubt. That your type quiet, firm, unwavering was ideal, not because you were holy, but because you wouldn't ask the wrong questions. You wouldn't go looking for the humanity in the accused. You'd just follow orders. And now, you wear the robe. Sometimes you wonder what your mother would think. She died before you took vows. She believed in saints and holy water, and miracles in bread crusts. She also believed that fear and faith should never share a pillow. You keep that thought hidden like contraband. Today, you're reviewing a case file. A midwife in Narbonne. She healed a noble's child with a paste of honey and ash. The child recovered. The noble's priest called it sorcery. And here you are deciding if a poultice is heresy. You stroke your chin, pretending to pray. But really you're wondering, is this what you were trained for? Sometimes you meet other inquisitors. They're not all the same. One collects relics fragments of robes, saint knuckles, splinters from crosses and keeps them in a velvet pouch during interrogations. Another writes poems between sessions. Dark, brooding lines about fire and mercy. You've stopped reading them. They make you feel too much. There's a hierarchy too. The best inquisitors don't just find heretics, they reveal them. They earn praise from bishops, get invitations to Rome, are treated like saints in waiting. You're not there yet. Maybe you never will be. You still hesitate before condemning someone who can't afford wine. You still flinch when someone begs to see their children before sentencing. But you hide it well. Tonight, as the stars prick through the monastery's cracked windows, you practice questions. Not just what to ask, but how. Have you ever heard the name of Lucifer spoken in prayer? Do you believe a woman can forgive sin without a priest? Have you ever seen someone rise from death without a bishop present? The trick is tone, not accusatory, not soft, just enough authority to make them wonder what you already know. You lock your notes in a wooden box, extinguish the candle with your fingertips, and lie back. In the dark, your thoughts echo louder than scripture. You rise before the sun, again, but this time not to read or write. Today, you're inspecting your tools. Not the metaphorical ones, logic, rhetoric, scripture, but the tangible ones that creak when you lift them and bite when you turn them wrong. The rack, the strappado. A small collection of irons, hoods, and water bowls, neatly arranged beneath the stone floor in a room no one admits exists. No, inquisitors didn't start with torture. That would have been impolite. Interrogation began with conversation, scripture, and those long silences meant to let guilt bloom in the air. But when the accused refused to break, when they repeated the same story, again and again, eyes wide and steady, well, that's when you took them here. You step into the chamber, nostrils flinching. It always smells like mildew, wax, and something faintly sour sweat maybe, or fear that dried and never left. A Dominican assistant joins you, solemn, silent, more shadow than person. He's new, but not hesitant. That's a good sign. You need quiet hands. On the table, lies a confession that's problematic. A man from Bayern who's admitted to attending a Cathar gathering but refuses to name others, claims he alone sinned. That's noble and dangerous. You've seen this trick before: sacrifice the self to shield the group. Admirable in fairy tales, deadly in real life. You read aloud the Pope's directive. No innocent shall suffer, but the truth must be uncovered. It's always that tension. Mercy in public, iron in private. A strange equation, and one you're fluent in. You begin gently. Ask him again. He says the same thing. Again. You nod. You don't shout. You never shout. You simply say, "Let's continue the questioning elsewhere." The guards understand. They've heard that sentence enough to stop flinching. Down below, you tie his wrists behind his back, hoist the rope over a beam. It's called strappado. The human body wasn't designed to hang by its arms behind the spine. The joints protest first, then the tendons. Then, if you're careless, the shoulder gives with a wet pop. But you're not careless. You're precise. Every pull has a purpose. He cries out, "Of course." They always do. But you're listening for something else. Not pain truth. Or at least, what sounds like it. He begins to name others. You write quickly. A tanner. A miller's wife. A crippled man who preaches barefoot. You can't verify any of it now. But that's not the point. Confession is evidence, even if it was screamed into the air, with torn ligaments. Historians still argue whether medieval torture was more symbolic than effective. Some say the goal wasn't information but humiliation. Others insist it was a last resort, reserved only for the most obstinate. The truth depends on the inquisitor, and you're starting to see why the word mercy can feel so twisted when it leaves your lips. One quirky tidbit: some inquisitors refused to touch the accused during torture, citing their vows. They would simply gesture, and others would act. That's how you keep your hands clean while your soul blackens. You finish the session, document the confession, and order the man returned to his cell. You note that he responded to the will of God, which is code for he talked. Then you remove your robe and wash your hands. Not for cleanliness, just habit. A ritual of your own making. Soap and water. As if that erases what you've heard. You walk to the chapel for a moment of stillness. But it's never quite still anymore. Not in your chest. Not in your ears. There's a high-pitched ringing that only silence reveals. Like the ghosts of screams burn themselves into your hearing. You return upstairs and find your assistant cataloguing confessions. He's fast, efficient. You ask his name. He tells you, and it slips right back out of your memory. Names blur now. You remember sins, not people. Your next visitor is voluntary. A merchant accused of harboring heretical books. You sit across from him, candle flickering between you. He swears he didn't know they were heretical, just borrowed from a friend. He even quotes scripture to prove his devotion. Clever, but too eager. You lean back, studying the way he clasps his hands. Tight, too tight. A practiced penitent. You probe further. He flinches when you mention the Gospel of Thomas. That's it. You press harder. Mention the rumoured Cathar beliefs that Christ never truly suffered. He blinks. His lip twitches. You see the fracture form. He breaks. Not with screams but with syllables. Quietly confesses he owns a second scroll. Hidden. Foreign. You write it down. He asks if that's enough. You don't answer. You just nod and dismiss him. That night, you eat alone. Bread, cheese, and watered wine. You used to dine in silence. Now you hear whispers. Not real ones. Memory echoes. Every sentence said in panic lives rent-free in your mind. And you wonder how much longer until your own words sound like that. You lay down, again, in that cold stone cell that only looks like a room because it has a blanket. You stare at the ceiling, its wooden beams like prison bars overhead. You remember a question from training. Would you punish the innocent to protect the faithful? You said yes. You meant it then. You're not so sure now. By now, you've memorized the rhythm of the hunt. It starts with a whisper, a note slipped beneath a church door, a baker who speaks too softly, or a child who saw their neighbor refusing to cross themselves at sunrise. You don't need torches and mobs. What you need is silence and fear. Fear is your loudest informant. Today, you mount a tired brown horse and ride out with your small retinue. A scribe, 2 guards, and the assistant you still can't remember the name of. The destination, a village nestled in the green ribs of the Pyrenees, small enough to be missed, big enough to matter if rot sets in. It's been flagged for spiritual review. Translation: someone talked. You don't wear armor, but you may as well. Your robe, dark and stiff, is enough. You ride into the village like a black dot on a clean page. Heads turn. Conversations pause. Even the chickens seem confused. You dismount slowly, deliberately. Let them look. Let them wonder. Your presence is already the first question. You settle in the church, commandeering the altar as your desk. Then you begin the visitation, walking the streets, knocking on doors, not to greet, but to listen. You observe everything. Who avoids your gaze? Who closes the window twice? Who keeps an empty bowl outside their door? A possible Cathar signal, though historians still argue whether that one's just superstition. A man approaches, nervously, offers you goat cheese as welcome. You decline, politely. Then you ask how long he's lived here. Simple question. He hesitates. Bad sign. You note it. He's now person of interest number 3. Welcome to the game. One quirky practice among Inquisitors was to watch which villagers hesitated at Mass when reciting Et in unum Dominum Iesum Christum. It was believed heretics often stumbled there, particularly dualists who denied Christ's divinity. You whisper the line to yourself as you sit in the pews, waiting, watching, listening. That night, you call an assembly. Not in a threatening way, just an announcement. All are welcome. You read a letter from the bishop, talk of cleansing and unity and the warmth of Christ, and then you drop the hook. Anyone with concerns about their neighbor's beliefs should come forward, anonymity guaranteed. You don't sleep that night. By morning, your inbox is full. Well, not literally, but metaphorically, your ledger has tripled. 4 names, 2 anonymous scrolls, 1 drawing of a woman with a serpent tongue. Okay, that one's probably just a child's nightmare. Still, you file it. Never underestimate symbolic testimony. You begin interrogations. First, a potter, simple man, honest eyes, claims he doesn't know what heresy is. You press gently. He sweats. You mention that his cousin was once excommunicated for lending an Albigensian text. That cracks him. He offers names. Friends who talked about God in the fields. Women who pray at dusk without candles. Is it true? Who knows? Is it enough? Always. One mainstream historical fact. Inquisitors often used the inquiry phase not to confirm guilt but to expand the web. Every answer led to another question. Each name brought 3 more. The process wasn't about truth. It was about saturation. Keep pulling threads until the whole fabric trembles. Next is a weaver's wife. Strong-willed. Stares at you too long. Not afraid. That's worse. She admits to healing with herbs. Claims it's tradition, not heresy. Says her grandmother taught her. You lean forward. Ask softly, did your grandmother ever speak of spirits that were not saints? Her mouth twitches. You have her. You order her held for further questioning. No torture yet. Just time. Silence is its own tool. As the days unfold, the village begins to change. People stop gathering at the well. Windows close before sunset. The priest starts every sermon with trembling hands. Not because of you, but because of what you might see in the congregation. And here's the part that gnaws at you. The people you accuse aren't villains. They're not plotting insurrections or sacrificing goats. They're odd, isolated, believers in strange echoes of faith. But does that make them dangerous? Or just inconvenient? Historians still argue whether the Inquisition crushed genuine threats or simply sanitized cultural messiness. Some say It preserved orthodoxy. Others say it erased valuable spiritual diversity. You? You stopped arguing with yourself 2 years ago. It's easier that way. One evening, you find a child waiting near your lodgings. She holds a note, shaky handwriting, a name, Martha, the widow. No signature, no explanation, but you recognize the script. It matches the Potters. You add Martha to the list. You've never met her, but you already feel tired at the thought. The next morning you visit her home. She's old, kind eyes. Offers you tea. You decline, gently. You ask questions. She answers plainly. No signs of deception, but no fear either. She even laughs when you mention devils. That's when you know. Only the inner center, the dangerously bold laugh in the face of accusation. You leave unsure. Mark her for review. Something about her unsettles you more than the liars. On the final day, you gather the accused. Public penance for some, imprisonment for 2, and one Martha you let go. No evidence, no confession, no stain. And yet, as you ride away, you keep seeing her face and hearing her laughter. The courtroom isn't much of a room. It's a repurposed chapel-arched ceiling, chipped icons, a smell that's equal parts incense and dread. There are no juries, no defense attorneys, no long speeches or dramatic objections. There's just you, your assistant scribbling with alarming speed, and the accused, seated on a creaking bench that always seems a little too low, like a reminder, you are not equal here. The man before you today is a schoolteacher, literate, polite, but unfortunately, fluent in ideas that swim a little too close to heresy. He quoted Origen once in front of a noble. Origen, who suggested even the devil might be saved, bold claim. You smile faintly. That's not doctrine. That's danger. You open your ledger. Begin gently. Are you familiar with the writings of the early church fathers? He nods. Careful. You ask which ones. He answers too fast. Clement, Justin, Jerome, Origen again. You raise an eyebrow. You know Origen's writings were condemned? He pauses. Just a flicker, then says, only some of them. Bad answer. Now, technically speaking, he's not wrong. Historians still debate whether Origen's ideas were wholly heretical or simply misinterpreted over time. But that's not your concern. Your job isn't nuance. Your job is containment. You press forward. Do you believe all souls are saved? He hesitates. That hesitation is more useful than any sentence he could offer. You lean back, gently tapping the ink pot with your finger. It's your version of a warning bell. One mainstream historical fact. Accused heretics had almost no rights under inquisitorial procedure. Their names were often withheld from accusers. They couldn't see evidence. They didn't get a lawyer. Their fate hung on your notes, your moods, and occasionally whether you'd eaten breakfast. You look over the scribe's shoulder. He's written evasiveness, underlined twice. That word could mean a year in a cell, or a week on the rack, or if the wind's wrong ashes. Still, there's a form to follow. You announce that the teacher will be retained for further consideration. You don't say what that means. He bows slightly, not in reverence, but defeat. Outside, the weather has shifted. Summer heat creeps in early. Sweat forms beneath your collar as you question the next woman, a miller's wife. She stumbles over basic liturgy, claims she's nervous. Fair enough. Most people don't recite the Nicene Creed with 3 friars glaring at them, but she also swears she's seen a spirit at her husband's mill. A light, she says, like a man with fire for hands. Now that is not going in her favor. You ask what the spirit said. She claims it didn't speak, just watched. Well, of course it did. That's what makes it creepy. You smile thinly and ask, did you pray when you saw it? She nods. You ask to whom? She says, to the light. Bad. Very bad. You order her to be held. Not because you believe she met the devil in the flour sacks, but because she clearly doesn't know who not to pray to. That's enough. One quirky fact. Some inquisitors actually used animals as truth gauges. A chicken brought into the room during questioning, if it squawked, it was seen as a divine warning. You've never stooped to that level, but you did once have a goat scream during a sentence. The accused fainted. Coincidence? Maybe, but the guards still talk about it. Back in your chambers, you review the day's files. A priest from Avignon once told you, "A heretic is just a question you haven't answered hard enough." That phrase stuck. You write it in the margins of the Miller's case. Still, there are moments that get under your skin. Like the girl last month, just 16, accused by her uncle, said she refused to kiss the crucifix. You remember her face, the quiet confusion. She said she was afraid of the wood splinters, said she didn't know it was wrong. You believed her, but you condemned her anyway. Historians still argue whether inquisitors truly believed they were right, or whether their own roles warped their vision. Did power blind them, or did fear? Fear of letting in the rot, fear of being blamed, fear of the wrong answer. You know fear. It doesn't shout, it whispers. It lives in the moments after sentencing, when the candles are out and the silence becomes louder than any scream you've ever heard. That night, your assistant brings you a new scroll, a fresh accusation, from an anonymous source. Claims a wealthy merchant has been paying to protect his brother from questioning. The merchant's name rings familiar. He sent you wine once, had a cousin in Toulouse. Generous, pleasant, powerful. This is the kind of accusation that changes things. You ask who delivered the message. The assistant shrugs. Left under the chapel door, you stare at it for a long time, not because you doubt its truth, but because you know the weight it carries. Investigate it, and you risk political backlash. Ignore it, and you become complicit. You mark it for later review. Oh, and there it is again, that voice in your head asking, when did justice become a matter of convenience? You extinguish your lamp and lie in the dark, the faces of the day's accused flickering behind your eyelids like ghosts at a window. The teacher, the miller's wife, the girl with the splinter fears, each with a different answer, all wrong. You roll onto your side and whisper a prayer you're not sure you believe anymore. And then you sleep, because tomorrow brings more names. The human mind, when under enough pressure, folds in surprising ways. You've watched this happen again and again under candlelight, across splintered tables, through hours of stillness so thick it bends the air. But today, you're not watching it happen to someone else. Today, the unraveling starts in you. It begins with the silence between questions. Normally, it's a tool. You ask, you wait, and you watch for a tremor, a sigh, a slip. But this morning, as you interrogate a woman accused of hosting unlicensed prayer meetings, the silence starts pressing back. She says nothing. You say nothing. And for the first time, the quiet doesn't feel strategic. It feels accusing. You rub your eyes. Fatigue, you think. Simple. But it doesn't go away. The woman blinks slowly, patiently, says her prayers are for her husband, lost at sea, that she lights a candle every night, not in rebellion, but in mourning, that she never speaks during the prayers, that she barely speaks now. You ask if others join her. She hesitates. That hesitation means you have to continue. Except, this time, you don't want to. You dismiss her. Write, "Further observation required," and close your ledger before your hand finishes the sentence. Your assistant looks at you, surprised. You never cut things short. You leave the hall and step into the courtyard, letting sunlight bleach your thoughts. The bell chimes somewhere above you, distant and innocent. You remember being a boy and believing bells could ward off evil. You thought holy sounds could chase shadows. Now you wonder if your voice, echoing through these stone chambers, has become one of those shadows. One mainstream historical fact that complicates your sense of purpose. Not all accused heretics were tortured or executed. Many were simply ordered to wear yellow crosses on their clothiza, public mark of shame. Others were forced to pray, fast, or walk pilgrimage routes barefoot. It wasn't always fire and iron. Sometimes the punishment was slow, lingering, unseen, but even those mercies can curdle. You once sentenced a man to a pilgrimage across the Alps in winter. He never returned. Maybe wolves, maybe weather. You wrote, "Expired on penance journey," a neat little phrase that meant he died for a mistake you weren't even sure he made. Historians still argue whether inquisitors like you believed in confession as redemptioner, simply a tool to clear the docket. Was it about grace or quota? You sit in your room that evening and reread your old notes. Your handwriting has changed. It used to curve, now it cuts. Your tone used to hesitate, now it commands. You find an entry from years ago. Subject claims to see visions of Mary, gentle, frightened, no sign of willful deviation. Recommend leniency, a generous note. That woman burned a year later. You didn't order it, but your note wasn't enough to stop it either. One quirky behavior you've picked up, though you'd never admit itis, that you count the steps between your quarters and the chapel. 49. Always. You walk them now, slowly, and lose count at 32. You stop, startled, a break in routine, a crack in control. You step into the chapel and kneel, but no words come. You know the prayers. You've recited them to the point of muscle memory. But tonight, they stick, somewhere between your throat and your chest, like a verdict you can't deliver. That's when you start hearing it. Not sound, not exactly. It's the memory of voices. Confessions you heard weeks ago, names whispered in terror, sentences that began with hope and ended in horror. They float up in the silence like oil on water. You stand abruptly and leave. The next morning, a case arrives from another district. A young man, accused by 3 different neighbors of preaching in the fields. You skim the reports. Nothing dramatic, no magic, no devil talk. Just a farmhand who quoted scripture too freely, said God lived in every leaf. That could mean heresy, or it could mean poetry. You sigh. You already know how this ends. You'll question him. He'll deny. You'll press. He'll break. He'll name others. And the circle will spin again. You rub your temples. Consider sending him back. But that's not how this works. Dismissal implies doubt. Doubt implies risk. So you prepare the chamber. Again, that evening, you meet him. He's young, barely 20. His wrists are red from rope. His eyes are open but not scared. He looks at you not like a judge but like a mirror, and that shakes you. He speaks before you can begin, says he won't resist, says God sees all, says even inquisitors will one day stand trial. Your mouth go dry. That night, you sit at your table, ink drying on your fingers, and realize you've forgotten how to sign your own name without pausing first. You reach for a familiar psalm, but stop halfway through. Something in the rhythm feels broken. You blow out the candle. You whisper into the dark, "How many truths did I silence?" And the dark, of course, does not answer. It's strange how holy authority can feel so deeply political once you step behind the curtain. You were trained to see yourself as a vessel and extension of divine will. But lately, you've started noticing that your orders come more often from bishops than from heaven, and heaven never asks you to double-check the seal. This morning you receive a letter stamped with the seal of the Archbishop of Narbonne. Thick wax, crisp script, and something very careful in the wording. It has come to our attention that you may wish to avoid direct investigation into the merchant Giraud of Toulouse, whose family is known to be generous to the church. Ah, there it is. You fold the letter slowly, slide it back into your desk, and stare at your hands. They don't tremble. You wish they did. Trembling might mean you still feel conflict, but all you feel is a dull, hard stone where your conscience used to sit. Giraud, the same man from the anonymous accusation, the one with the wine, the cousin in Avignon, the one Wono confirmed has bought himself not innocence, but immunity. You've been taught to root out heresy no matter the name or title. that even a pope's nephew must answer if found guilty. But that's not how it works in practice. In practice, you weigh souls in the same balance as coins. You wonder when that began. Historians still argue how corrupt the inquisitorial system truly was. Some claim bribery was rare, exaggerated by Protestant critics. Others argue that entire cases were shaped, delayed, or erased by political favor. You don't need historians. You have this letter. You have your silence. That's enough. Still, it festers. You spend the afternoon overseeing a case involving a group of traveling preachers. They call themselves the Brethren of the Spirit. Say they speak with angels. Say the church is too heavy with gold and rules. You don't disagree, but you must proceed. The trial is brief. 3 men, 1 woman. They quote scripture like it's air. They argue calmly, but calmly is still opposition. So, you issue penance, public flogging, mandatory silence. 2 of them weep. 1 does not. That night, the one who didn't weep hangs himself in his cell. Your assistant finds him, tells you while you're reviewing another scroll. You pause, nod, say, have the body prepared, and then you keep writing. Because if you stop for every ghost, you won't move at all. One mainstream historical fact: suicide among the accused was surprisingly common. Some couldn't bear the shame. Others, the weight. A few saw death as the last act of rebellion. Of course, suicide was a sin, so you wrote, deprived himself of salvation, and moved on. But he stays with you, not just because of what he did, but because of what you didn't do. You could have released him. The accusations were weak, the evidence thin, but your superiors wanted unity, not logic, so you folded. Again, that night, you open the old scroll from your training. It still smells of mildew and ink. The section titled, Obedience Above Doubt, is underlined in red. You remember doing that. A young friar with no idea how heavy obedience would become. You feel a pressure behind your eyes. You go for a walk through the cloister. It's late. No one else is awake. The moonlight turns the stone floor silver. You hear your own footsteps echo, and for a strange second, it sounds like someone following. You stop. Nothing. You keep walking. Thina whisper. Not from a voice, from your memory. That teacher, the miller's wife, the woman who prayed to the light, the girl afraid of wood splinters. They all said things that didn't feel dangerous, just unfamiliar. And unfamiliar became suspicious. Suspicion became guilt. You kneel in the grass, the chill biting your knees, and you whisper, I don't know if I'm saving souls anymore. No one answers. One quirky superstition you once mocked suddenly returns to you. A fellow friar believed that every lie told under oath left a mark, an invisible bruise on the wall behind the accused. You laughed when he said it. But now you stare at your own walls and wonder why the stone looks darker in some places. You return to your quarters. There's a letter waiting. From Rome. A summons. They want a report. On your work. On your caseload. On your discretion. You know what that means. They're not checking your accuracy. They're checking your loyalty. You sleep poorly. Your dreams are fractured. You see Marthy again, the widow you released. She's walking through the woods, holding a candle that won't light. She keeps looking over her shoulder. And you realize, she's not looking for someone. She's waiting to be followed. You leave at dawn, Rome-bound. The sky is pale and quiet, as if the world itself is holding its breath for what comes next. Your robes are pressed, your documents sealed in a neat leather satchel, and your thoughts, well, they're not so tidy. The journey is long, villages blur by. You pass forests that once hid heretics, inns that once whispered your name in fear. Now, no one whispers. They recognize the black robe, the sharp gaze, but you see something different in their eyes now. Not reverence, not even fear, weariness. You arrive at the papal court not with fanfare, but with a letter of introduction and a subtle tremor in your chest. The corridors smell of incense, ink, and polished ambition. Cardinals sweep past like robed birds of prey. Monks bow, scribes glance up, then down, back to their endless copying of decrees and condemnations. You're summoned to speak before a tribunal of senior Inquisitors' grey-robed men whose eyes seem made of stone. One of them, you notice, carries no writing tools, just watches, judges, measures. You sit. They begin. How many active cases in Carcassonne? 70. 3 Reverend Fathers. How many executions in the last fiscal season? 4 confirmed, 2 pending. They nod, scribble, ask about protocols, about consistency, about leniency, and then they ask the one question you'd hoped they wouldn't. Have you ever hesitated? You pause. Too long. Long enough to become its own answer. One of them, the one with the cracked voice, leans forward and says, "Mercy is commendable, but doubt, brother, doubt must be confessed." You feel your throat tighten. There is no correct reply. You nod, softly, say you understand, and they move on. But the question doesn't end. That evening, you're not permitted to leave the compound. Too many eyes, too many ears, so you walk the inner cloister. Read the names carved into the marble wall names of inquisitors who rose, succeeded, ascended. You wonder how many hesitated. You wonder if that's why they carved them in stone so the ghosts stay there. A scroll is delivered to your chamber, sealed with red wax. It is an official decree. You are to be elevated, not punished, not demoted, promoted. They want you to supervise inquisitorial activity across multiple districts. Your success rate has been noted, your precision admired, your clear judgment praised. And there it is, the twist of the blade. You've doubted, hesitated, even broken a little inside, and yet to the church you're exemplary. Historians still argue how much the Inquisition rewarded zeal versus discretion. Some say the most brutal men were promoted. Others say it was the quiet ones, the ones who never made waves. You are beginning to understand that the truth lies in the silence between both. You have a choice. You could accept the role, gain more power, more reach, use it perhaps to temper the process, reduce suffering, steer from within. But you know that's the same excuse everyone gives before they become the very blade they once feared. That night, a young novice enters your chamber, brings food, bows, and says, "The Lord sees your strength, Father." You almost laugh, not out loud, not rudely, but quietly, in that bitter way you've started to smile when no one's watching. Because if the Lord sees you, then he must also see what you've done. You return home days later, greet your assistant, review your ledgers, pretend to resume the work. But something is missing now. Resolve? Perhaps. Or maybe it's the idea that you ever had it. One mainstream historical fact. Many inquisitors retired into quiet lives of prayer, often claiming physical exhaustion. But there are records faint, barely preserved, that suggest some simply vanished, disappeared from their posts. No explanation, no pursuit, as if the church, too, knew when to let certain ghosts walk away. You sit beneath the olive tree behind your monastery and stare at your hands. They are clean, they are calm, they are complicit. And then someone calls your name. A messenger from Toulouse. Another case. A noble's niece found reading an old text. The cycle, as always, continues. You fold the letter, and this time you don't respond. Not yet. Maybe never. You delay your return to Toulouse. Officially, you claim an illness fatigue of the chest, perhaps spiritual exhaustion, the kind only prayer and solitude can cure. No one questions you. After all, you've served faithfully, with diligence, with a success rate the tribunal themselves called exceptional. You've earned rest. That's what they say. But you don't rest. Instead, you travel alone. No assistant, no guard. You take side roads, walking when you can, listening to the world instead of interrogating it. Forest birds call. Carts rumble in the distance. Every once in a while, someone nods politely without knowing who you are. That anonymity is strange, beautiful, even. You stop in a small village near Albi. They don't know your name. Just see a quiet man in dark robes who offers to help repair the chapel roof in exchange for bread. You hammer nails, you sweep floors. One afternoon, you read aloud to the children because their priest has gone lame in one leg and can't climb the steps anymore. And then, one evening, you hear it. A woman soft-voiced, weathered sings a hymn in a dialect you recognize from your early cases. It's not Latin. It's not approved. It's a Katha prayer, repurposed as a lullaby. You freeze. Your breath catches, and you realize you're not shocked. You're moved. You follow the sound to a small home lit by firelight. A mother rocks a child, humming, unaware of the supposed gravity of her song. She's not defiant, not radical, just remembering, passing down what she was told, the way others pass recipes or charms or bedtime tales. You say nothing, just watch, and then, quietly, you walk away. Historians still debate how much of Cathar tradition survived the Inquisition. Most say it was destroyed completely. Others believe it survived in fragment songs, symbols, even superstitions passed through generations, unspoken yet present. You're beginning to think the fragments are enough, maybe more than enough. The next morning, you help bury an old man who died in his sleep. The villagers carry him gently, singing. You don't recognize the words, but you know their purpose. And in that moment, you realize how different mourning feels when it isn't administered under order. Back in your quarters weeks later, your assistant finds you stunned. You're thinner, quieter. He begins to speak of the cases waiting, the merchant's niece, the teacher's widow, a recent report of laughter during Mass. You stop him with a wave of your hand. Not yet, you say. Your voice doesn't shake, but it's softer, like a bell struck once and allowed to fade naturally. You open your ledger. You stare at a blank page, and you don't write a name. Instead, you turn back to older entries, review them, not for edits, for remembrance. You trace the loops of your younger handwriting, see the ink thicken where your hand once trembled. You read the margins, the notes, the verdicts, and then you find one, a single word, scribbled beside a woman's name, Marth. You had written, "No cause found, released." You underline it, once, slowly. One quirky rumor you recall from early training resurfaces, that some inquisitors, near the end of their careers, would go back and burn their own ledgers, not to hide guilt, but to release the weight, as if the ink itself carried the screams of those condemned. You don't burn your book, but you declose it. That evening, a child approaches the chapel where you kneel. She watches you from the doorway, doesn't speak, just waits. When you finally turn, she asks, "Are you the man who asks the hard questions?" You consider her phrasing, and reply, "Not anymore." She smiles, hands you a flower wild, crooked, bright purple, not symbolic, just kind. You place it on the altar, beside your candle. The flame flickers gently, and for the first time in a long while, you feel warmth without guilt. Outside, night falls, but not with dread, just with silence and possibility. Word spreads slower than truth, but faster than forgiveness. Soon, it reaches the episcopal court in Carcassonne. Inquisitor Marcellus is delaying cases. Inquisitor Marcellus is reflecting. Inquisitor Marcellus has gone soft. They don't send soldiers, not yet, just a letter, polite, cold. Your presence is requested. You stare at it for a long while, the parchment resting on your desk like a coiled snake. It does not threaten you directly. It doesn't need to. You understand what it means. Decline, and you draw suspicion. Accept, and you walk into a room full of eyes. You go, but not before you do something you've never done in all your years. You visit the prison, not to interrogate, to listen. You ask to see a young man accused of rebellious theology. He's gaunt, but calm, smiles faintly when you enter. "Have you come to try again?" he asks. You shake your head. "Number, I've come to hear your side." He blinks, then laughs. Not cruelly, just amazed. No one's ever asked before. He tells you of his father, who taught him letters by candlelight, of the old texts he read, of the God he imagines not just above but within. You don't interrupt. You just nod. At the end, he says, "I don't hate you. You're just a man playing a part he no longer believes in." That hurts more than any accusation, because it's true. Historians still debate whether the Inquisition ever allowed such moments human, unrecorded, unsanctioned grace. Some say no, that it was a machine. Others say Inquisitors were, in fact, very human, and that their journals when found are riddled with doubt. You believe the latter, because you are now one of them. The court session in Carcassonne is quiet. There are no formal charges. Not yet. Just inquiries. We are concerned. There are reports. A delay in action may embolden the heretical spirit. The bishop speaks like a man reading from a script he's read too many times. Then comes the offer. Not a demotion, a redirection. Take a teaching post. In Rome. Remove yourself from the field. Honorably, silently, let others continue the work. It's a trap, of course. A velvet noose. Accept, and you become irrelevant. Decline, and you become suspicious. You nod slowly. Thank them for their consideration. Say you will pray on it. Oh, that night, you wander the cloisters. The bells ring. A monk reads aloud from Augustine. The candlelight flickers. Everything is in its place, and none of it feels real anymore. You remember your first sentencing, the trembling voice, the rope, the silence afterward, and the lie you told yourself, "I did the right thing." One mainstream historical fact. There were inquisitors who left the church, not loudly, not with rebellion, quietly, vanishing into towns, under new names, working as scribes, teachers, even apothecaries. Their stories survive in fragment parish notes, forgotten letters, whispered legends. You've read them. Once, you pitied them. Now, you envy them. You return home. You write your report. You close it with a phrase that sounds like compliance. May the church be protected from within. But you also pack a satchel. One robe, one flask. Your mother's old wooden cross, still worn smooth from her hands. And nothing else. You don't say goodbye. You don't leave a note. You just leave. It's raining. Of course it is. You step into the road, the mud soft beneath your feet, the wind curling like breath around your collar. You do not look back, because there is no penance left in the place you're leaving. Only memory and ashes. You travel without a name. The road winds south, through smaller villages, into places where inquisitors were once feared, then forgotten, where people no longer hide their prayers behind locked doors, but sing them openly in dialects no official mass would ever approve. You stay quiet. You offer no judgment, just your labor, your listening. At first, it's difficult. You've lived for years as a presence people fear. Now, you must become invisible not to sneak, but to unlearn. To detach from that shadow you once wore so tightly around your shoulders. You take work where it's offered, repairing fences, tending goats, sweeping chapels. You sleep in barns, inside rooms of monasteries too poor to ask questions. You eat simply, speak rarely, listen always. And slowly, you begin to see the cracks in the system you once upheld. You meet a woman who still wears a yellow cross sewn into her cloak, ordered to by an inquisitor 30 years ago. Her son was accused, burned. She still wears the mark, not from obedience, but because she wants them to remember what they did. You help her plant onions. You meet an old man with a crooked spine, who preaches kindness over doctrine in the village square. He calls it quiet holiness, says no man needs a book to know when he's cruel. You nod. You know exactly what he means. Historians still argue whether the end of the Inquisition was due to internal rot or external reform. Some claim it collapsed under its own contradictions. Others insist it was reabsorbed, masked, made more palatable. You don't care which is true. You know it ended slowly. And for people like you, maybe it never really ended at all. One night, a boy knocks on your borrowed door. He asks, "Were you once one of them?" You hesitate, and then you nod. He doesn't run, doesn't scream, just looks up and says, "Did you stop?" You say, "Yes." He asks, "Why?" You say, "Because I remembered how to hear." He squints. "Hear what?" You pose. Then answer, "The truth that doesn't scream." He seems satisfied. That night, you sleep more deeply than you have in years. You wake to a small loaf of bread left by your door. Gratitude, not for who you were, but for who you're trying to become. You keep moving, now known in these parts as the quiet brother. You begin sharing stories not of fire and courts, but of people who healed, who forgave, who endured. You tell no one what you once did, but you never forget. One quirky local tale you encounter amuses and unsettles you. In a nearby village, they say that when a man dies, he must walk backward through every lie he ever told before he can enter heaven. You wonder how long your own walk would be. You keep a journal now. Not a ledger, not a list of names, just memories, reflections, regrets, sometimes even hopes. You write about Martha, the widow, the one you let go, the one who laughed in the face of accusation. You wonder where she is, if she's alive, if she remembers you, if she ever forgave you for dragging your shadow across her door. You hope so, but you don't expect it. Forgiveness isn't owed, only offered. One afternoon you pass a crumbled chapel and find children playing where the altar once stood. They've made halos out of vines. They ask if you know any stories. You smile and begin with, "Once there was a man who thought he was holy, but forgot how to be good." They listen, wide-eyed. They do not know you are the man in the story. That is your gift to them, and their gift to you. Years pass. Seasons shift like breath. Your hair grays. Your hands stiffen. But you remain in the borderlands, never staying too long in one village, never going so far as to vanish completely. You live as a helper, a listener, a whisper that once had a name and now prefers silence. The Inquisitor in you still wakes, sometimes especially in dreams. In those moments, you're back in the questioning chair. The candle flickers. The room is too small. The silence feels dangerous again. But in the dream, the accused never cries. They simply look at you and ask, "Why?" And you never answer, because even now you're still learning what the answer is. You spend a winter helping a small monastery rebuild its roof. The brothers there are young, earnest. They ask you nothing. But one of them, Timotheus, is curious. He watches the way you kneel, the way you pause before using God's name, the way you never take the host during Mass. One evening, he sits beside you near the fire and says, "You used to wear black, didn't you?" You nod. He asks no more. That, more than anything, is grace. You hear, years later, that Rome has revised certain practices, that leniency is now encouraged in borderline cases, that public penance is replacing public fire, that the tide is turning. You're not sure whether to believe it, but part of you hopes it's true for the sake of those still wearing yellow crosses sewn by hands like yours. You meet a former Inquisitor, unseen old man with twisted fingers and a voice that barely holds itself together. He recognizes you immediately, says your name softly. "I thought you were dead," he says. You shrug. "Maybe I was." He nods. "Me too." You sit together, share bread, say nothing else. One mainstream historical fact. By the late 14th century, the intensity of the Inquisition had already begun to fade. Fewer executions, more paperwork, a shift from terror to bureaucracy. But even in its decline, it left scars in every village, every family, every hymn sung in the wrong language. every prayer said with one eye open. You've spent your years not repenting aloud but repairing, quietly, one garden fence, one injured ox, one frightened boy at a time. You carry no ledger now, just that journal, pages worn thin, entries sometimes no longer legible, and toward the back, one page stands alone, folded neatly. It contains no names, only a sentence. There is no virtue in obedience when your soul whispers no. You wrote it in a fever, one autumn night when the wind howled like old voices. You've never changed it. One quirky local legend has always stayed with you. They say the soul weighs the same as a sparrow, that at the moment of death it flies out, perches on the roof beam, and waits to be judged not by saints, but by the last person you wronged. If that's true, you wonder who will greet you. Maybe that teacher, maybe the girl who feared the crucifix splinters, maybe Martha. You hope she's smiling when she sees you. You hope they all are, because you are not that man anymore. But you were, and you carry that, not as a chain, but as a memory, and some memories must never be forgotten. So now, the candle has burned low, and your footsteps have softened in the grass. You've laid down the robe, the ledgers, the questions, and walked away from the firelight into something quieter, something gentler. In this moment, picture the air turning cool as dusk sets in over the hills. You hear no screams, no creaking wood, no rustling parchments, just the sigh of trees in the wind, the occasional bell from a distant chapel, and the slow, steady sound of your own breath. You are not what you did, but you remember it, and that memory lives inside you, not as punishment, but as purpose. Let that be enough. Let that quiet be your absolution. So wherever you are tonight, curled in bed, nestled on a couch, lost in late-night thought, know this: even the most brutal roads can lead to gentleness. Even the darkest cloaks can be set down. You don't have to be the voice that questions. You can be the one that listens. Now rest. Close your eyes. Let the night cover you, not in fear, but in forgiveness. And when sleep comes, let it be free of candles, chains, and names. Let it be soft. Let it be yours. Sweet dreams.